is that gambling is always wrong no matter what the purpose. Now before we dive in, let's clarify exactly what it is, what we mean by gambling. So let's define gambling. According to Webster's dictionary, gambling is playing games of chance for money or some other stake. So it has the element of game and it has the element of money being put on the line. So this would include things like casinos, it would include card games where money is put down, it would include slot machines, the lottery, betting on races like a horse race or some other sort of race. It would even include participating in some sort of office bracket where there's money put down on what team's going to win, whether it's the NFL or March Madness or something like that. Now, it does not include things that are risky but not intended to be games. There's this kind of broad use of the term gamble. So for example, if my wife sends me to the supermarket to get some detergent and I get there and I don't know which kind of detergent to get, and so I say to myself, I'm going to take a gamble and buy the blue bottle, okay? And I use the word gamble, but that's not the kind of gambling we're talking about because that's not, it doesn't have the idea of a game to it. Or sometimes people try to pretend that gambling might refer to the stock markets, it might refer to investing in mutual funds or something like that, but that's ordinarily not considered a game. So gambling is putting money on the line as a game, as a form of entertainment. Now, as we approach this issue, we've got to realize that the issue of gambling is not in the Bible. It's never addressed straight on. There's no commandment that says, "Thou shalt not gamble." But I do believe that a biblical argument against gambling can be built. And so my plan is first to show that gambling often, though admittedly not always, gambling often is prompted by sinful heart motivations, that is, some sort of internal sin. However, I will secondly attempt to prove that even if one's heart is in the right place, there are still several reasons that gambling is inherently wrong, and therefore it should not be practiced. So first, gambling is wrong because it's fueled by sinful heart motivations. Now we know that the Bible is concerned with heart motivation. God often told the Israelites that he didn't want their burnt offerings if their hearts were far from him. He was concerned with the heart. The Proverbs tell us that above all else we should guard the heart. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount was concerned not just with external behavior, but he was concerned with internal motivations. And when it comes to gambling, there's a wide variety of motivations that are sinful. First, many are motivated to gamble because of greed. They want money, and they want lots of money. And while the Bible never condemns money as such, the Bible does make it clear that greed or coveting is wrong. The 10th commandment is crystal clear. Thou shalt not covet. Ephesians 5:3. It's fascinating. It says, "But among you there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality or of any kind of impurity." And then the third item that makes the cut is there should not be even a hint of greed, because these are improper for God's holy people. So the Bible condemns the motivation of greed and coveting. Connected with this, another kind of motivation is the motive of money, the sin of loving money. 1 Timothy 6:10. "For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil." Hebrews 13, verse 5. "Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have." And it goes on in that passage to say that what you have is God. And so free yourselves from loving money. Now, if we're honest, we'll admit that most people go to a casino or play the lottery because they want money. It's the love of money that is driving them. The North American Association of State and Provincial Lotteries, which is quite the mouthful, says that Americans spend $70 billion per year on lottery tickets. Now, that's just the lottery industry. It's not the entire gambling industry. $70 billion a year. Why? Why do these people spend so much money? Well, often, it's love of money. These people are driven by a love of money, which leads into another motivation, and that's the motivation of false hope. They wouldn't call it that, but the reason people pull the lever of a slot machine or purchase the Powerball ticket is because it gives them a moment to dream. It gives them a little chance to think about what life would be like if they had money. And it's a false hope. It's not a true hope. Behind this is the idea that if I get what I want, I'll be happy. And that is not where our hope is supposed to be. Our hope should be in God. We need to be able to rely on God to provide for all our needs, to give us just what is necessary. Now, on the side here, it's interesting, in Scripture there are references to the rolling of dice, and in these passages it states that God is the one who's deciding how the lot falls, how the dice rolls. So whether it's choosing Matthias to be an apostle, or there's a passage where the die is rolled to determine which Levites will serve in the temple. In those passages, we have the rolling of die, and so some have argued that God therefore approves of gambling. But you'll notice that in each of those instances, the rolling of the dice shows dependence on God. There's this willingness to follow His lead and let God determine. And that's the exact opposite of how the gambler today thinks. So the gambler today, say in the casino, does not rely on God, but is relying on his own craftiness and ingenuity in gambling. And so these are people who have failed to see that God will provide. They've failed to rely on God. Well, another motivation, false motivation, sinful motivation, is laziness. It's all tied together with what's previously been said, but many people play the lotto or run to the casino because it's easy. It's easier than actually working. They're lazy. And so they dream of this kind of get rich quick success. But of course the Bible speaks of the blessing of diligent, consistent labor. The Bible talks about work. In the Garden of Eden, Adam was made to work, and work was good. It was a blessing to him. The Proverbs say that the best use of money, the best accumulation of money, is money that's accumulated little by little through work. Ecclesiastes 5 says that the man who loves money will never have enough, but instead, chapter 2, it says that a man can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in his work. And so we're told in Ephesians not to steal, but to work with our own hands. Interestingly, the implication there is that not working, for example, gambling, is stealing. There's a contrast between work and stealing. And so then implicit is the fact that gambling is a violation of the 8th commandment, thou shalt not steal. A final heart motivation might be a worship of chance. You may actually kind of get a thrill, get a high. You're addicted to the high of luck and fortune. And that could be a worship of chance, a worship of fortune. And God condemns this. Isaiah 65, verse 11. Here God rebukes Israel for, quote, spreading a table for fortune and filling bowls of mixed wine for destiny. And then in a play on words, God goes on to say that I will destine you for the sword. And so God clearly condemns the worship of fortune. And so you see in all of this, there is sinful motivation so often associated with gambling. Really, gambling has become something of an idol. It's become something that gives me satisfaction other than God. I'm finding my happiness in something that is not my Savior. And so in essence, I've violated the first and second commandments in worshiping something other than God. Okay, fine, Craig, you might say. But for me, it's none of those things. I like to spend $50 on a night of poker, but my heart is good. It's just fun entertainment. It's no different than watching a movie or going out for a nice meal. I don't have that sinful motivation that you've been talking about. Well, I might first respond by saying that the heart is deceptive. It's deceptive above all things. And So we need to be careful here. When we say we have no bad motivation, no sinful motivation, we have to wonder, are we really being honest with ourselves? And also, of course, an action can still be inherently wrong even if I believe I'm doing it with a clear conscience. And so you may have a clear conscience about your gambling, but that doesn't mean that the action isn't necessarily wrong. So for example, there may be someone who thinks it's okay for them to fornicate, but that doesn't suddenly make the action of fornication okay. And so this brings us to our second point. And our second point is this. Even if your heart is pure, okay, and all the heart motivation stuff that's already been mentioned does not apply to you, even if that's the case, gambling is sinful because there are elements of gambling that are intrinsically wrong. That is to say, all forms of gambling necessitate certain actions which are themselves inherently wrong. And I'm going to give you 3 of them. First, it's wrong to cause poverty. It's wrong to cause poverty. And it cannot be denied that gambling causes poverty. When someone wins millions of dollars in the lotto, at the casino, at the racetrack, where did it come from? It came from other people who no longer have that money. And many of these victims are actually people that are addicted to gambling, and the gambling system takes advantage of their very addiction. And that's wrong. Proverbs 22, verse 22 says, "Do not exploit the poor because they are poor." It's wrong to cause poverty. Secondly, it's wrong to squander the resources of time and money. In other words, it's wrong to waste time. It's wrong to waste money. Of course, our money is not even our own. It doesn't ultimately belong to me. Everything belongs to God. 1 Corinthians 4, what do you have that you did not receive? It's God's money. And we have been called to be good stewards of it. You'll remember that parable that Jesus told, the parable of the talents. And the man who wasted his money, who buried his money, was the one that was condemned. And gambling is a waste of money. You know, unlike other forms of entertainment, we spend money on movies, we spend money on watching a football game, we spend money on books that we read. But unlike those forms of entertainment, in gambling there's no clear return on your money. You don't know what you're getting for your money. Gambling is never a wise investment, and so it's not being a good steward of the resources that God has given to us. And then a final inherent problem with gambling is that it could easily cause your brother to stumble. And as a Christian, this should concern me. 1 Corinthians 10 says that in whatever I do, I'm to glorify God, and I am not to cause anyone to stumble. You know, gambling becomes inherently wrong simply because it can so easily offend my brother. There's no clear consensus on the issue of gambling. And so within the church, there are certainly brothers and sisters who are opposed to gambling. And so when I assert my right to gamble, I actually come across as one of the strong crushing the weak. I'm not helping the weak. I'm not loving them. Instead, I'm giving offense to them. I'm causing them to stumble. And that means even if my heart is okay with gambling, and I realize I'm not doing it for wrong motivations, even then, I should stay far from it out of a desire to keep my brother from stumbling. So, I've argued that gambling is wrong because 1, it is so often connected with sinful heart motivation, and 2, because it's wrong in and of itself. You know, if something is known by its fruit, it's fascinating to look at the fruit of the gambling industry. The gambling industry has only produced more and more poverty and crime and dishonesty and alcoholism and exploitation and addiction and broken families. If this is the fruit of the gambling industry, I wonder what the tree itself looks like. Maybe Mark Twain was right when he once said, "The best throw of the dice is to throw them away." Thank you.